Did you know that beneath the glamour and spotlights of Hollywood's golden age, some of America's most beloved movie stars traded their costumes for military uniforms when duty called? As World War II engulfed the globe, these celebrities stepped away from fame and fortune to serve alongside ordinary Americans in the greatest conflict of the 20th century. Their stories of sacrifice and service reveal a side of these icons rarely seen on the silver screen. James Stewart. When Japanese bombs rained down on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Jimmy Stewart was already volunteering to serve his country. The lanky, soft-spoken actor had become the first major Hollywood star to enlist in the military before America's entry into World War II, joining the Army Air Corps in March 1941. At 33, Stewart was initially rejected for being underweight, standing 6 feet 3 inches but weighing only 138 pounds. But he was determined to serve. He embarked on a crash diet of spaghetti, steak, and milkshakes to bulk up for a second physical examination, which he passed by a mere 2 pounds. Stewart's decision to enlist wasn't made lightly. He had just won an Academy Award for The Philadelphia Story and was at the peak of his career, commanding top salaries and his choice of roles. Moreover, as the son and grandson of veterans, Stewart felt a profound sense of duty that transcended his Hollywood success. Despite his fame, he rejected special treatment and insisted on working his way through the ranks like any other soldier. Initially assigned as a flight instructor in the United States, Stewart repeatedly requested combat duty but was considered too valuable as a trainer and for promotional purposes. He finally got his wish in November 1943 when he was sent to England as part of the 445th Bombardment Group. Stewart quickly proved himself not just a celebrity in uniform, but a skilled aviator and natural leader, rising from captain to major and eventually to colonel by war's end, one of the few Americans to rise from private to colonel in just 4 years. Flying B-24 Liberator bombers over Nazi-occupied Europe, Stewart commanded bombing missions that took him deep into enemy territory. On one harrowing raid, flak burst through Stewart's plane, the Dixie Flyer, taking out 2 engines and leaving a gaping hole at his feet. Despite the damage, he completed the mission and somehow managed to bring the aircraft home, though upon landing, the plane broke apart, with a crack ripping from the bulkhead to the cockpit. All told, Stewart flew 20 combat missions as commander, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Air Medal with 3 Oak Leaf Clusters, and the French Croix de Guerre with Palm. Unlike many celebrities who returned to civilian life after the war, Stewart remained in the Air Force Reserve, eventually reaching the rank of Brigadier General in 1959. He even flew a non-combat mission during the Vietnam War, before retiring in 1968 with nearly 3 decades of military service. When he returned to acting after World War II, Stewart brought a new depth to his performances. The war had matured him, and films like It's a Wonderful Life and later Winchester 73 reflected a more complex, sometimes darker on-screen presence than his pre-war characters. In later interviews, Stewart rarely discussed his wartime experiences, exhibiting the characteristic modesty that defined both his acting career and military service. However, in one of his final interviews before his death in 1997, he revealed, "I think about the war almost every day. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life." Stewart's dual legacy as both an iconic actor and genuine war hero exemplifies how the lines between Hollywood heroism and real-world courage blurred during this pivotal moment in American history. Clark Gable. When Clark Gable, Hollywood's undisputed king, enlisted in the Army Air Forces in August 1942 at age 41, both studio executives and President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself tried to dissuade him. MGM was horrified at losing their most bankable male star, while Roosevelt personally telegrammed Gable with direct orders, "Stay where you are." But Gable, devastated by the recent death of his beloved wife Carole Lombard in a plane crash while returning from a war bond tour, was resolute. When asked why he was joining at his age, Gable simply replied, "I'm going in because I don't want to be sitting on my fat behind on a movie set when this thing is going on." True to his independent nature, Gable refused the officer's commission that would have been customary for a man of his stature. Instead, he entered military service as a private and earned his officer's rank through the Standard Officer Candidate School program. After completing training as an aerial gunner and combat photographer, Gable was assigned to the 351st Bomb Group stationed in England, where his primary mission was creating a recruitment film about aerial gunners in combat, a project that required him to fly actual bombing missions to gather authentic footage. Despite MGM's pleas to keep their valuable star safely on the ground, Gable insisted on experiencing real combat to make his documentary authentic. Between May and September 1943, he flew 5 official combat missions on B-17 Flying Fortresses over Germany, a remarkable act of courage, considering the extremely high casualty rates for bomber crews at that time. During one mission, a 20mm shell tore through the plane where Gable had been sitting moments earlier, nearly killing Hollywood's biggest star over Nazi territory. Gable's presence in the European theater created a stir among both Allied troops and the enemy. Adolf Hitler, reportedly a fan of Gable's films, offered a substantial reward to any German who could capture the actor alive and bring him to Berlin, making Gable's combat missions even more dangerous. Meanwhile, fellow servicemen were initially starstruck, but quickly came to respect the aging actor's commitment and work ethic. One officer noted that Gable didn't want to be treated any differently than any officer of his rank would be treated. The documentary Gable created, Combat America, was released in 1945 to critical acclaim and served as vital propaganda to support the war effort. His narration brought the harrowing experience of aerial combat home to American audiences in a way few other films could. After the war, Gable was discharged in June 1944 at the rank of major with several military honors, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal. When MGM chief Louis B. Mayer tried to capitalize on Gable's service with plans for military films, the actor flatly refused. Though Gable returned to Hollywood and continued making films for another 16 years until his death in 1960, friends noted that he was never quite the same after the war. The combined trauma of losing Lombard and his combat experiences had left their mark. Actor David Niven, who also served during the war, later wrote that when Gable returned, he was a changed man, subdued and hollow-eyed, trying to drink himself into oblivion. He was never again to regain his old happiness and zest for life. Gable's wartime service stands as a testament to the genuine patriotism that motivated even the most privileged Americans to risk everything when their country called. Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda was already an established star when Pearl Harbor was attacked, having earned an Academy Award nomination for his portrayal of Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath. Though married with children, and at 37 years old, beyond the age when most men were drafted, Fonda felt compelled to serve. With characteristic directness, he explained his decision by saying, "I don't want to be in a fake war in a studio." This sentiment reflected his lifelong commitment to authenticity, both in his acting and his personal ethics. Before formally enlisting, Fonda and his close friend James Stewart worked together raising funds for the defense of Britain through various Hollywood events. But passive support wasn't enough for Fonda, who officially joined the United States Navy in August 1942, as a quartermaster third class. Given his fame and education, he could have secured an officer's commission, but like many Hollywood enlistees, he initially chose to enter as an ordinary sailor. Fonda's natural leadership abilities quickly became apparent, and he was encouraged to apply for a commission. After completing officer candidate school, he was appointed as a lieutenant junior grade in air combat intelligence. Assigned to the USS Satterlee, a destroyer operating in the Atlantic, Fonda's responsibilities included planning operations and gathering intelligence. Though his ship primarily conducted escort duties for convoys crossing the treacherous Atlantic where German U-boats hunted Allied shipping, Fonda also saw action during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, where he served as a deck officer. For his service during this period, Fonda was awarded the Bronze Star Medal, which recognizes heroic or meritorious achievement or service. He also received the Navy Presidential Unit Citation, indicating that his ship had distinguished itself in combat operations. Though Fonda rarely spoke about his wartime experiences after returning to Hollywood, colleagues noted that his military service had added new dimensions to his acting. Films like Mr. Roberts, where he portrayed a naval officer longing for combat duty during World War II, were informed by his own experiences and rang true with veterans in a way that purely fictional portrayals could not. When Fonda returned to Hollywood after the war, his career entered its most productive and critically acclaimed period. The maturity and gravitas he brought to roles in films like 12 Angry Men and The Oxbow Incident established him as one of America's most respected actors. These performances, characterized by moral seriousness and quiet integrity, mirrored qualities that defined both his military service and his approach to citizenship throughout his life. Humphrey Bogart. Long before he became synonymous with trench coats and world-weary cynicism, Humphrey Bogart served his country in the United States Navy during World War I. Born to privileged parents in New York City, Bogart enlisted in the Navy in 1918 when he was just 18 years old. His first taste of military service came aboard the USS Leviathan, a troop transport ship that ferried American soldiers to European battlefields, and later on, the USS Santa Olivia. Though World War I ended before Bogart could see extensive action, his naval service left a permanent mark, both figuratively and literally. The scar on his upper lip and his characteristic lisp, which became part of his iconic screen persona, reportedly resulted from a shrapnel wound received during his military service. However, the exact circumstances remain contested, with some biographers suggesting the injury occurred when Bogart was escorting a prisoner who struck him. Whatever the truth, Bogart's distinctive speaking style emerged from this period of his life and became one of his most identifiable traits as an actor. Bogart received an honorable discharge from the Navy in 1919, with the rank of Seaman Second Class. When asked about his service in later years, he typically downplayed his contributions, once remarking, "At 18, war was great stuff. Paris, French girls, hot damn." This self-deprecating attitude characterized Bogart's approach to his military experience, though friends noted he maintained a lifelong respect for naval traditions and discipline. When World War II erupted 2 decades later, Bogart was too old for active service, but contributed significantly to the war effort through entertainment initiatives. He participated extensively in USO tours, both at home and abroad, performed in armed forces radio broadcasts, and appeared in propaganda films that boosted morale and encouraged support for the war. His 1942 film Across the Pacific, though criticized for its somewhat fanciful portrayal of espionage, helped alert Americans to the threat posed by Japanese agents before Pearl Harbor. Gene Kelly. Before he danced his way into cinema history by splashing through puddles in Singin' in the Rain, Gene Kelly traded his tap shoes for naval boots during World War II. Stewart. At the height of his early fame, following breakthrough performances in For Me and My Gal and Cover Girl, Kelly received his draft notice in 1944 and was commissioned as a lieutenant in the United States Naval Air Service. Though known for his athletic grace on screen, Kelly's military assignment would challenge him to use his artistic talents in entirely different ways. Rather than serving in combat, Kelly was assigned to the photographic section of the Navy's Office of Public Information in Washington, D.C., where military leaders recognized that his talents could be better utilized in creating training and documentary films. His background as a choreographer proved surprisingly valuable as he developed instructional films that used movement and visual storytelling to communicate complex information to naval personnel. As Kelly later explained, I was able to choreograph processes and procedures in ways that made them easier to understand and remember than traditional training methods. During his naval service, Kelly worked on a variety of projects, including Combat Fatigue Irritability, an educational film aimed at helping sailors and their families understand and cope with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Kelly also appeared in naval recruitment films and programs designed to maintain morale among service members. Though not facing enemy fire, Kelly's work played a vital role in preparing American naval forces for the challenges they would face in the Pacific Theater. Kelly served in the Navy until his discharge in 1946, rising to the rank of lieutenant. Unlike some of his Hollywood colleagues, Kelly rarely discussed his military service in interviews, preferring to focus on his artistic achievements. However, the discipline and precision he developed choreographing military training films influenced his later directorial approach. Film historians have noted that the carefully structured visual sequences in Kelly's post-war musicals bear the hallmarks of his naval training film experience, where clarity of movement and purpose were paramount. Upon returning to Hollywood, Kelly's career soared to new heights with a string of classic musicals including An American in Paris and Singin' in the Rain. The physical fitness and discipline he maintained during his military service contributed to the athletic dancing style that became his trademark. Moreover, Kelly's wartime experience working with camera operators and editing techniques expanded his understanding of filmmaking, empowering him to take greater control over his dance sequences and eventually move into directing. David Niven. When World War II erupted, David Niven didn't hesitate. The debonair British actor, who had built a successful Hollywood career playing charming aristocrats and officers, immediately returned to England to rejoin the British Army. Unlike many actors who entered military service when war broke out, Niven had authentic military credentials, having trained at the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, and served as a lieutenant in the Highland Light Infantry from 1930 to 1933, before resigning his commission to pursue acting. Niven's decision to abandon his flourishing film career represented a significant personal and professional sacrifice. Having just appeared in successful films like Wuthering Heights and Raffles, the 29-year-old actor was beginning to establish himself as a leading man in Hollywood. His producer, Samuel Goldwyn, was furious about Niven's departure, warning him, "You're being a bloody fool." Niven simply replied, "There's a war on," and took the next boat to England. He later recalled, "I couldn't have lived with myself if I hadn't gone back." Recommissioned as a lieutenant in the British Army, Niven was eventually assigned to the Phantom Reconnaissance Unit, a specialized intelligence-gathering force. His wartime service was far from the glamorous officer roles he portrayed on screen. Niven participated in the Normandy landings on D-Day, June 6, 1944, where he helped coordinate beach defenses. During the chaotic Allied advance through France, he served as a liaison officer, utilizing his fluency in French to communicate with local resistance, fighters, and civilians. Niven maintained his characteristic wit even in the darkest moments of the war. During the Battle of the Bulge, when caught behind enemy lines wearing a trench coat rather than a proper uniform, he was questioned by an American soldier suspicious that he might be a German infiltrator. When asked to identify the capital of Nebraska, Niven quickly responded, "Lincoln," and then added, "Don't you think this is a rather silly line of questioning?" This ability to find humor in dangerous situations helped sustain both Niven and his fellow soldiers through the war's most challenging periods. By the war's end, Niven had risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel and earned the American Legion of Merit for his service. Unlike many celebrity servicemen, Niven rarely spoke about his wartime experiences after returning to Hollywood, preferring to deflect questions with humor. It wasn't until the publication of his memoirs, decades later, that the full extent of his service became known. When asked why he had remained so reticent about his military achievements, Niven explained that the real heroes were the ones who didn't come back. Robert Montgomery. Robert Montgomery was already an established MGM star with 2 Academy Award nominations when he became one of Hollywood's first leading men to enter military service after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Having starred in films like Night Must Fall and Here Comes Mr. Jordan, Montgomery was 37 years old and at the peak of his career when he joined the United States Naval Reserve in 1941, even before America's official entry into the war. Montgomery's path to military service began with humanitarian work. In 1940, he traveled to England as a volunteer ambulance driver during the Blitz, witnessing firsthand the devastating impact of German bombing on London civilians. This experience crystallized his conviction that America would inevitably enter the conflict, and he began preparing by obtaining a pilot's license and studying navigation. Upon his return to the United States, he used his celebrity status to advocate for American intervention, appearing at rallies and radio programs supporting the Allied cause. Initially commissioned as a lieutenant, Montgomery quickly distinguished himself and rose to the rank of lieutenant commander. His first naval assignment was aboard the destroyer USS Barton, where he served as an assistant naval attaché observing British naval operations. Later, he commanded a patrol torpedo boat in the Solomon Islands, participating in combat operations that put him directly in harm's way. Montgomery's PT boat experiences paralleled those of John F. Kennedy, who also commanded such a vessel in the Pacific Theater. Montgomery's most significant wartime role came during the D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. Assigned as a naval combat observer, he was aboard the destroyer USS Lafayette during the assault on Utah Beach, providing crucial coordination between naval gunfire and ground forces. For his service during this pivotal battle, Montgomery received the Bronze Star Medal, one of the highest recognitions for combat valor. Unlike many celebrity servicemen who participated in entertainment units or worked primarily on training films, Montgomery spent most of his naval career in operational combat roles that put him directly in danger. A fellow officer later recalled, "Bob never asked for special treatment and never received any. He performed his duties like any other naval officer, except perhaps with more dedication." This commitment to serving as a regular officer, rather than trading on his fame, earned Montgomery profound respect from career military personnel. After the war, Montgomery returned to Hollywood with a new perspective that influenced both his acting and his broader career choices. He moved increasingly into directing, making his debut with Lady in the Lake, where he pioneered the use of subjective camera techniques. Tyrone Power. When America entered World War II, Tyrone Power was at the absolute pinnacle of Hollywood stardom. The dashingly handsome actor had captivated audiences in swashbuckling adventures like The Mark of Zorro and historical epics such as Blood and Sand, establishing himself as one of 20th Century Fox's most bankable assets. Studio head Darryl F. Zanuck was so desperate to keep his star that he offered Power a deal that would allow him to make recruitment films while avoiding active service. Power's response was unequivocal. "I don't want to be an embroidered soldier." True to his word, Power enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in August 1942, shocking both the studio and his millions of fans. At 28 years old, and at the height of his earning potential, Power's decision represented a significant financial sacrifice. Furthermore, he rejected the officer's commission that would have been standard for someone of his education and status, initially joining as a private before attending Officer Candidate School and earning his commission through the standard channels. Power specifically requested combat duty, training as a pilot in the Marine Corps Air Wing. After earning his wings as a naval aviator, he was assigned to Marine Transport Squadron 353, flying Curtiss R-5C transport planes in the Pacific Theater. While transporting troops and supplies might seem less glamorous than fighter combat, these missions were both essential and dangerous, often taking Power's aircraft within range of Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire. From January 1945 until the war's end, Power flew numerous combat missions, including the critical Iwo Jima and Okinawa campaigns. Though rarely discussed in his official biographies, military records indicate that Power also participated in intelligence-gathering operations, using his aircraft to transport reconnaissance personnel and equipment behind enemy lines, missions that carried significant risk of capture or death if discovered. Power's military service earned him several commendations, including the American Campaign Medal, the Asian Pacific Campaign Medal with 2 stars, and the World War II Victory Medal. Perhaps more telling than these official recognitions were the assessments of those who served with him. One fellow Marine pilot later recalled, "If you hadn't known he was a movie star, you'd never have guessed it. He was just one of the guys, doing his job like everyone else, except maybe with more determination to prove himself." When Power returned to Hollywood in November 1945, he discovered that the industry and audience tastes had changed during his absence. Though he resumed his career successfully with films like The Razor's Edge, colleagues noted that his approach to acting had deepened, informed by his wartime experiences. Director Henry King, who worked with Power both before and after the war, observed, "The boy who went away was not the man who came back." There was a new seriousness, a new understanding of human suffering that gave his performances dimensions they hadn't had before. Glenn Ford. Before becoming known for iconic roles in films like Gilda and The Big Heat, Glenn Ford demonstrated his commitment to military service not just during World War II, but across multiple decades and conflicts. His remarkable military career began even before America's entry into World War II, when he joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary in 1941, while the United States was still technically neutral. This early demonstration of foresight regarding America's eventual involvement in the conflict foreshadowed Ford's lifelong dedication to military service. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Ford joined the United States Marine Corps Reserve in December 1942. Despite his rising star status after breakthrough performances in films like So Ends Our Night, Ford insisted on starting at the bottom as a private and earning advancement through the same channels as any other Marine. After completing training at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, he was assigned primarily to photographic and intelligence duties, eventually reaching the rank of sergeant. Though Ford hoped for combat deployment, his superiors recognized that his talents could be better utilized in training and morale-building roles. He participated in a 12-city war bond tour across the United States, helping raise millions of dollars for the war effort before being assigned to the Marine Corps Photo Section, where he created training films and documentation of Marine operations. For his service during this period, Ford received the American Campaign Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, and the United States Marine Corps Reserve Medal. What distinguishes Ford from many other Hollywood veterans is that his military service didn't end with World War II. After resuming his acting career with tremendous success in the late 1940s and 1950s, Ford maintained his commitment to the Naval Reserve, regularly taking leaves of absence from filming to fulfill his military obligations. When the Vietnam War escalated, Ford, then in his 50s, volunteered for active duty and served several tours in Vietnam as part of the Naval Reserve, rising to the rank of captain. Ford's military service spanned an extraordinary 35 years, encompassing 3 major conflicts: World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. This long-term commitment went far beyond the patriotic surge that motivated many of his colleagues during World War II, reflecting a deep-seated dedication to service that paralleled his acting career. For his lifetime of military contribution, Ford received numerous decorations, including the Navy Commendation Medal and the Marine Corps Reserve Ribbon. Mel Brooks. Long before he became one of America's most beloved comedy filmmakers with classics like Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, Melvin Kaminsky served his country in one of the war's most dangerous roles. Born to Jewish immigrants in Brooklyn, Brooks was just 17 years old when he enlisted in the United States Army in 1944, motivated not just by patriotism, but by a visceral understanding of the threat Nazi Germany posed to Jews worldwide. After scoring highly on the Army's intelligence tests, Brooks was initially placed in the Army Specialized Training Program, where he studied military engineering, horsemanship, and even saber-wielding. However, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Europe, the Army needed infantry reinforcements more urgently than specialized trainees. Brooks was reassigned to the 1104th Engineer Combat Battalion and shipped to Europe shortly after the D-Day landings in June 1944. As a combat engineer, Brooks had one of the war's most perilous assignments: clearing minefields, defusing unexploded ordnance, and building bridges under enemy fire. These engineers typically worked ahead of advancing troops, making them vulnerable to both enemy attacks and the inherent dangers of their explosive handling duties. Though Brooks later downplayed his wartime experiences with characteristic humor, military records confirm his participation in the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's desperate last offensive on the Western Front in December 1944. Beyond his engineering duties, Brooks found himself drawn into an unexpected wartime role that foreshadowed his future career. Recognizing his quick wit and musical talents, his commanders occasionally assigned him to entertainment duties, organizing shows and performances to maintain troop morale during the grinding advance across Europe. This early experience performing for battle-weary soldiers helped Brooks develop the irreverent, boundary-pushing comedy style that would later make him famous. After Germany's surrender, Brooks remained in Europe as part of the occupation forces, where he had a surreal experience that later influenced his comedy. As a Jewish soldier from Brooklyn, he took particular satisfaction in using a military public address system to broadcast Jewish songs across the defeated Nazi territory, a small but meaningful act of defiance against the regime that had attempted to exterminate his people. This combination of comedy and confrontation with dark historical forces would later define Brooks's most significant work, particularly The Producers, with its satirical treatment of Nazi Germany. Charles Bronson. Before his weathered face and taciturn persona made him an international action star in films like Death Wish, Charles Bronson experienced the brutal reality of aerial combat over Nazi Germany. Born Charles Bukinski to Lithuanian immigrant parents in the coal mining region of Pennsylvania, Bronson knew hardship from an early age. The son of a coal miner, he worked in the mines himself before the war. developing the physical toughness and stoic demeanor that would later define his screen persona. When the United States entered World War II, Bronson was drafted into the Army Air Forces in 1943 and assigned as a B-29 Superfortress aerial gunner in the 760 Flexible Gunnery Training Squadron. After training, he was deployed to the Pacific Theater with the 61st Bombardment Squadron, where he flew numerous combat missions against Japanese targets. The role of aerial gunner was extraordinarily dangerous, with bomber crews suffering some of the highest casualty rates of any combat position during the war. Bronson rarely discussed his combat experiences in detail, but military records indicate he completed 25 missions as a B-29 gunner. For his service, he received the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat, an honor that testifies to the genuine danger he faced. These missions over enemy territory required not just courage, but the ability to function under extreme conditions. As B-29 gunners operated in unpressurized compartments at high altitudes where temperatures could drop to 50 degrees below zero. The discipline and psychological resilience Bronson developed during his military service served him well after the war when he pursued acting. Using the GI Bill to study art and then acting, Bronson slowly built a career playing tough, no-nonsense characters in films like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape. In the latter film, which depicted Allied prisoners of war planning an escape from a German POW camp, Bronson's performance as the Tunnel King carried the authenticity of someone who had actually faced the enemy in combat. Ironically, despite his real-world experience fighting against Nazi Germany, Bronson found his greatest fame playing a Polish prisoner of war in The Great Escape and a Russian partisan fighter in Battle of the Bulge. His authentic military background gave these performances a credibility that resonated with audiences, particularly veterans who could recognize the genuine article beneath the Hollywood dramatization. Unlike some actor veterans who parlayed their military service into publicity or patriotic credentials, Bronson maintained a characteristic reticence about his wartime experiences. When asked about his Purple Heart in interviews, he typically deflected or changed the subject. This privacy about his service aligned with both his naturally reserved personality and the stoic male code common among combat veterans of his generation. Alan Ladd. Before becoming one of film noir's most iconic leading men in classics like This Gun for Hire and The Blue Dahlia, Alan Ladd endured a difficult path to both stardom and military service. Born to impoverished parents in Arkansas, Ladd experienced extreme poverty during his childhood, at times subsisting on just one meal a day. Through determination and physical discipline, he transformed himself from an undersized, malnourished youth into the chiseled, blonde leading man who would captivate audiences in the 1940s. When America entered World War II, Ladd was 28 years old and had just achieved his breakthrough role in This Gun for Hire. Eager to serve, he attempted to enlist immediately, but was initially classified 4F due to stomach issues and a double hernia, likely consequences of his childhood malnutrition. Frustrated by this rejection, Ladd spent months working with doctors and physical trainers to improve his condition, determined to qualify for military service despite his newfound fame and financial success. In January 1943, after extensive medical treatment and physical conditioning, Ladd was finally able to join the United States Army Air Forces. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on Hollywood observers. The actor whose physical presence had made him a star had to fight to prove he was physically capable of serving. Due to his age and lingering health concerns, Ladd was assigned to the 1st Motion Picture Unit, the military's film production division based in Culver City, California, rather than combat duty. Though disappointed not to serve overseas, Ladd threw himself into his role creating training and recruitment films. The 1st Motion Picture Unit, commanded by producer Jack Warner and staffed by numerous Hollywood professionals, produced nearly 400 films during the war, making vital contributions to training, morale, and public information. Ladd's distinctive voice and screen presence made him particularly effective in these productions, which reached millions of service members and civilians. Ladd's military service was cut short in November 1943 when he collapsed on set during filming. Military doctors discovered that his stomach condition had worsened, likely aggravated by the stress of his duties, and he received an honorable medical discharge after less than a year in uniform. Though brief, his military service represented a significant personal victory over the physical limitations that had initially disqualified him, as well as a reflection of the patriotic commitment that led him to risk his hard-won career momentum. Lee Marvin, decades before his gravelly voice and intimidating screen presence made him one of Hollywood's most convincing tough guys. Lee Marvin experienced the brutal reality of combat in the Pacific Theater. Enlisting in the United States Marine Corps in August 1942 at age 18, Marvin was assigned to the 4th Marine Division as a scout sniper, one of the military's most dangerous and psychologically demanding roles. Unlike actors who served in entertainment units or stateside assignments, Marvin saw some of the war's most intense fighting in the island-hopping campaign against Japan. Marvin participated in numerous amphibious landings, including the bloody invasion of Saipan in June 1944. During this operation, he experienced the kind of close-quarters combat rarely depicted accurately in the war films of the era. In a letter home from Saipan, he described encountering a Japanese soldier in a machine gun nest. "He tried to stick his bayonet in my eye. So I took it away from him. It wasn't hard to do because he was just a little bastard, maybe 5'2" or so." This matter-of-fact description of life and death struggle foreshadowed the unsentimental realism Marvin would later bring to his war films. Marvin's combat career ended abruptly during the Battle of Saipan, when he was severely wounded by Japanese machine gun fire that severed his sciatic nerve. For his injuries, he received the Purple Heart and spent 13 months in naval hospitals recovering. The wounds left him with a permanent limp, barely noticeable to movie audiences, but a constant reminder to Marvin of his wartime experiences. He received a medical discharge from the Marines in 1945 with the rank of Private First Class. Unlike some veterans who preferred not to discuss their combat experiences, Marvin spoke candidly about the psychological impact of war. "You're not ever free of the trauma," he once explained. "You're just able to cope with it better." This insight informed his approach to roles in war films, where he insisted on realism over Hollywood heroics. Directors valued his technical input on military authenticity, and fellow veterans in the film industry respected his first-hand understanding of combat psychology. Marvin's breakthrough as an actor came in the 1950s, playing villains and tough characters on television and in films like The Big Heat. His career reached new heights in the 1960s, with leading roles in war films including The Dirty Dozen and Hell in the Pacific. In these performances, critics noted a complexity and authenticity that transcended typical action heroics. As director Samuel Fuller, himself a highly decorated World War II veteran, observed, "Lee understood the duality of violence, how it can be both necessary and destructive. You can't fake that understanding. It comes from experience." Eddie Albert. Eddie Albert is primarily remembered today for his role as the city slicker-turned-farmer in the television comedy Green Acres. But long before he charmed audiences with his bumbling agricultural efforts, Albert performed genuine acts of heroism during one of World War II's bloodiest battles. Born Edward Albert Heimberger in Rock Island, Illinois, Albert had already established himself as a versatile actor in films like Brother Rat, when the attack on Pearl Harbor prompted him to put his career on hold, and enlist in the United States Navy. Commissioned as a lieutenant in the Naval Reserve, Albert was assigned to the USS Sheridan, an attack transport ship involved in the Pacific Island hopping campaign. His most significant wartime action came during the invasion of Tarawa in November 1943, one of the war's most brutal amphibious assaults. When the initial landing waves became pinned down on the beach by intense Japanese fire, many wounded Marines were stranded in the water, unable to reach shore and at risk of drowning as the tide rose. Witnessing this desperate situation, Albert volunteered to pilot a small landing craft toward the reef where the wounded were trapped. Over 3 days, under constant enemy fire, he made repeated trips to rescue stranded Marines, personally saving nearly 70 men who would otherwise have perished. For this extraordinary act of bravery, Albert received the Bronze Star with Combat V for Valor, a decoration that recognizes genuine heroism in the face of enemy fire. Fellow servicemen who witnessed Albert's actions at Tarawa noted his calm efficiency under fire. One survivor later recalled, "He didn't say much, just kept going back out there, never showing fear even though bullets were hitting all around his boat." This courage under fire contrasted dramatically with the comedic, sometimes bumbling characters Albert would later portray on screen, illustrating the complexity that lay beneath his public persona. After Tarawa, Albert participated in the invasion of Saipan, where he continued to demonstrate courage under fire. Following his discharge from active duty in 1945, he remained in the Naval Reserve, eventually retiring with the rank of lieutenant commander. Like many combat veterans, Albert rarely discussed his wartime experiences in detail, though he maintained lifelong connections with Marine veterans of Tarawa and occasionally attended reunions with the men he had rescued. Jason Robards. Before winning consecutive Academy Awards for All the President's Men and Julia, Jason Robards Jr. survived one of World War II's most harrowing naval disasters. Following in the footsteps of his father, a silent film star, Robards enlisted in the United States Navy in 1940 at age 18, becoming a radio man on the heavy cruiser, USS Northampton. His decision to join before America's entry into the war reflected both family tradition — his father had served in the Navy during World War I — and a desire for adventure beyond his native Los Angeles. Robards' war experience changed dramatically on November 30, 1942, during the Battle of Tassafaronga near Guadalcanal. Japanese torpedoes struck the Northampton, causing catastrophic damage that eventually sank the ship. Robards and his shipmates spent hours in the shark-infested waters of the Solomon Sea before rescue arrived. Of this experience, Robards later said, "I was in the water about 2 or 3 hours before they picked us up. I thought it was a day and a half. Terror makes time stand still." After recovering from this ordeal, Robards continued his naval service aboard the light cruiser USS Nashville, participating in numerous combat operations in the Pacific Theater. His naval career culminated with his presence at Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, where he witnessed Japan's formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri. This historic moment made a profound impression on the young sailor, who later recalled, "I'll never forget the sight of those battleships in the harbor. It was the end of one thing and the beginning of something else entirely." Discharged from the Navy in 1946 as a radioman first class, Robards used the GI Bill to study acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Unlike actors who had established careers before the war, Robards' military service preceded his professional acting career, meaning he didn't sacrifice fame or fortune when enlisting. However, his naval experience profoundly shaped his artistic development, informing the authentic masculinity and quiet authority that became his trademark as an actor. Robards' breakthrough came on stage rather than screen, with his definitive portrayal of Eugene O'Neill's alter ego in Long Day's Journey into Night, followed by acclaimed performances in The Iceman Cometh and other O'Neill plays. When he transitioned to film in the 1960s, directors noted his natural authority and emotional authenticity, qualities Robards himself attributed partly to his wartime experiences. As he once explained, "After you've faced death, you don't fear much in a rehearsal room or on a movie set." The psychological complexity Robards brought to his performances in films like A Thousand Clowns and Once Upon a Time in the West reflected his understanding of how trauma and resilience shape human character. His portrayal of Washington Post editor Ben Bradlee in All the President's Men, which earned him his first Academy Award, showcased the moral courage and steadfast integrity that echoed his own naval service, where responsibility and truthfulness could mean the difference between life and death. Audie Murphy. While most actors on this list interrupted established Hollywood careers to serve in World War II, Audie Murphy reversed this pattern. His extraordinary military heroism preceded and directly led to his film career. Born to poor sharecroppers in Texas, Murphy was just 17 years old when he enlisted in the Army in 1942, after being rejected by both the Marines and paratroopers due to his small stature. Despite his diminutive size and youthful appearance, Murphy would become the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II, earning every available U.S. combat award, including the Medal of Honor. Assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, Murphy fought in Sicily, Naples, Anzio, Rome, southern France, and finally Germany, participating in some of the European theater's most brutal campaigns. He received his first 2 Bronze Stars in Italy for actions where he single-handedly destroyed German machine gun nests that had pinned down his unit. As he advanced through the ranks from private to lieutenant, Murphy demonstrated not just personal courage, but tactical intelligence and leadership ability that belied his youth and limited education. Murphy's most famous action came on January 26, 1945, near the French village of Holtzwihr, when his company was attacked by German forces with 6 tanks and waves of infantry. Murphy ordered his men to withdraw while he remained forward to direct artillery fire. As the situation deteriorated, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, used its machine gun to hold off the German infantry, and continued directing artillery strikes by a field telephone. During this action, Murphy sustained a leg wound, but continued fighting, single-handedly killing or wounding approximately 50 enemy soldiers and forcing the German tanks to withdraw. For this extraordinary feat, Murphy received the Medal of Honor. By war's end, Murphy had accumulated 33 awards and decorations, including 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. When Life magazine featured him on its cover in July 1945 as America's Most Decorated Soldier, the quiet, boyish-looking veteran caught Hollywood's attention. Actor James Cagney invited Murphy to California and helped him begin an acting career that would eventually span 44 films over 21 years. Murphy's most significant film was To Hell and Back, where he portrayed himself in the adaptation of his own autobiography. The film broke Universal Studios' box office records, holding the company's highest-grossing film title for 20 years until Jaws surpassed it in 1975. What made Murphy's performance remarkable wasn't just that he was recreating his own wartime experiences, but that he consistently downplayed his heroism during production, insisting that certain actions be toned down because audiences wouldn't believe it actually happened that way. Despite his success as an actor, Murphy struggled with what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. He suffered from insomnia, nightmares, and depression, sleeping with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and becoming dependent on sleeping pills. With characteristic honesty, Murphy spoke openly about these struggles at a time when combat trauma was rarely acknowledged publicly. After the war, they took the dogs home, they took the mules home, they took the horses home, but they didn't take the soldier home, he once observed, becoming an early advocate for recognition and treatment.